You're listening to the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.
We're dealing with a situation where someone puts produce into custody. They put produce into custody with, let's say, their neighbor, and the produce gets mixed up. So we learned, for example, that if it's wheat, then the custodian is going to return slightly less than the amount originally lodged because of wastage or shrinkage. And we said everything goes according to time and quantity. So we know, for example, that in the summer, wheat is going to shrink as it dries up. And by the way, in the winter, it's actually going to expand as it gets damper. So when you deposit stuff with your neighbor, if it's all mixed up with his and you have to measure to get it back, well, the measurement is going to include an allowance for time. And it's actually the same with wine. So with wine, yotzilo shtut layain. With wine, he deducts 1/6. Rabbi Yudah Omer chomesh. Rabbi Yudah says 1/5. And this must be for evaporation. And of course, we already know that in terms of when you're keeping a wine cask today, you get a certain amount of evaporation. Yotzilo shloshet lagim shemen lamer. With oil, he deducts 3 logs in 100. That's basically 3%. I mean, oil doesn't evaporate. But, okay, well, let's find out. Log umechza shmarim. 1.5 logs for sediment. So when it kind of sits around, stuff drifts to the bottom of the barrel. So we need to imagine now that you've deposited this oil in your neighbor's oil tank. So it's all mixed up. Obviously, when you get your oil back, you're going to get it back from the top of the tank. But the sediment from your oil has drifted down to the bottom. It's sitting essentially in the bottom of your neighbor's tank. So we're going to deduct 1.5% for the sediment. And logu merza bela, 1.5 logs for, well, bela means swallowing. Swallowing. Now, what is swallowing here? Well, of course, the tank is swallowing. If it's tank made out of earthenware, or it's a tank made out of wood, the fabric is going to absorb the oil as the oil is sitting in it. So some of your oil is sitting in the earthenware or in the barrel, and of course the custodian can't get it back. That's just lost. So he's going to deduct 1.5% for absorption. And the Mishnah continues, Im haya shemen mezukak eino yotzilo shmarim. If the oil's refined, then we don't have to worry about sediment. The sediment's already been taken out. So if the oil's im haya shemen mezukak, if the oil is refined, we don't have to make a deduction for sediment. And as we've already discussed, everything goes according to the physical quantities of the object being deposited. The rabbis love to have the latest technology and the latest estimates. So they're going to distinguish between refined oil and unrefined oil. Similarly, in kanim yishanot, let's say the jars were old. So old jars don't absorb because their structure is already full of absorbed oil. So they're not going to absorb anything else. In kanim yishanot eino yotzilo bela. If the jars are old, he doesn't deduct for absorption. We don't have to worry about absorption. So in theory, if he deposited refined oil in old jars, he'd get back his oil without any deduction. Rabbi Yudah Omer. Rabbi Yudah says, Hamocher shemen mezukak lachavero kol yemot hashana. Someone sells to his fellow refined oil through the whole year. So we're going to sell refined oil We're going to sell refined oil to our neighbor for the whole year. And the implication here, by the way, is that we're taking a payment up front. So from the time we take the payment, effectively we're keeping this oil. We're keeping his oil. And we're going to dole it out to him in small quantities as we need it. We can imagine if we were an oil merchant and we had the storage facilities, and our neighbor wanted to secure his supply of oil for the year, but did not have the storage facilities, then the neighbor might be coming every week to get a little bit of oil from the tank, just effectively to draw down the quantity of oil that he has purchased. And so Rabbi Yehuda says, if someone sells to his fellow through the year, he should accept a reduction of 1.5 logs in 100 for sediment. Now, it's really interesting that the Kaufman manuscript here says, someone sells refined oil to his fellow through the year. So it's not clear, actually, why there should be a deduction for sediment. We've said refined oil doesn't deduct for sediment. And that part of the Mishnah is not quite clear. It's an interesting variant in the Kaufman, which we might have to go back to. Anyway, as the Mishnah does, it always moves gently from subject to subject. And it remains on the question of the custodian's responsibility, and, by the way, on the question of the barrel and the properties of the barrel, but in a slightly different direction. Someone actually left the jar or the barrel with his neighbor. So he's not leaving the oil, he's actually leaving the barrel. Presumably this is a full barrel. And the owners didn't assign it a special place. In other words, he just said, look, here's the barrel, you take care of it for me. And he moved it and he broke. He moved it and it broke. The guardian must have moved it and it broke. So who's going to be responsible now? The owner didn't actually say, oh yeah, you have to keep it here. So in theory, the guardian has got the right to move it. Let's keep reading in the Mishnah. If it broke while he was handling it, if it actually broke while he was handling it, and he actually moved it for his own sake, he wanted that space. He wanted that space. Or maybe he wanted to stand on it to get a high object. That's the possibility that the Gemara brings. He wants to stand on the barrel to get something high. So he moves it into a convenient position and it breaks. He's liable. L'tzorcha patur. If he moved it for the sake of the jar, he's exempt. So let's say maybe the jar was in a dangerous position. He was worried that an oncoming ox would bash into it. He moved it into somewhere safer. At that point, he's exempt. And if it was broken after he put it down, whether he moved it for his reason or for the barrel's reason, he's still exempt. Let's say the owner had assigned it a special place. So the owner said, look, keep it here for me. And he moved it and it broke. It doesn't really matter whether it broke while handling or after handling. If he moved it for his own reasons, he's liable. He has to pay the cost of the barrel and of whatever's in it. If he moved it for its own sake to protect it, then he's exempt. And the Gemara is going to compare later in the end of the chapter. We'll see that the halacha compares someone who moves an object without someone who borrows an object without the permission of the lender is equated to a thief, and a thief is really, well, he's liable for all damage. So that seems to be the reasoning behind the Mishnah. And maybe it's easier to see these out when they're schematic. It's a pity that the Mishnah doesn't have matrices. I guess they couldn't print matrices in the time of the Mishnah. But we can see that if the jar breaks while it's being moved, then whether the reason is, if it's moved for the sake of the guardian, then the owner is always going to be liable. And if it's moved for the sake of the jar, the guardian will never be liable. But if the jar breaks after the move, then the guardian is never liable unless the owner actually told him where to put it. And if the owner tells him where to put it and he moves it, then at least if he moves it for his own sake, he's always going to be liable, even if it breaks a week later or a month later or a year later. Once he's moved it for his own sake, he's liable.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.